Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 37th pick out of my top 50 favourites. And recently, of course, in this series we discussed one of my favourite LMP cars, the Panoz LMP-01 Roadster S, which is from my favourite team overall, but as I alluded to in that episode, that is actually not my favourite prototype of the modern era, but that one is actually this car, the Cadillac LMP-02, and the 02 in particular is my favourite. The LMP and the LMP-01, not so much, because there are actually three different variations of the Cadillac LMP program in the year 2000, 2001 and 2002. And this isn't a car which a lot of people talk about, so as far as how well or how not well the car did in racing, many people aren't aware of that kind of info, just like with the Panoz. Because most people tend to know stuff like where Audi finished, which is generally quite easy to remember. Just put a number 1. That's generally how they finished, and if it wasn't them, it was Bentley. But cars like this are easily overlooked. Now, as far as success, the Cadillac didn't have as much as the Panoz. The Panoz, as I mentioned in that episode, did have a few podium finishes, a few first-place finishes even. The Cadillac, not so much. In the year 2000, with the LMP, they had the best result of a 4th. That's not great. Not out of the entire season especially. Then in 2001, with the LMP-01, the best result was a podium finish, but still a 3rd. So they've gone from 4th to 3rd. Then, this one, my favourite version, the LMP-02, which is the most visually different of the three, and that's the main reason why I like it more, had a 2nd place finish. So it's funny how the first year they got 4th, then 3rd, then 2nd. Maybe if they have raced the car and refined it for 2003, they could have had a win. At least that's what the chronological order would indicate. Now, of course, it probably wouldn't have worked out that way, but still, a 2nd place finish isn't bad. They also had 3 3rd place finishes as well, so this was a far more successful car than the first 2. Now, as far as overall ability, it's got nothing on the Panoz. It's quite simply not as good. However, it is a car which I have so much love for because of different reasons to the Panoz. Because Panoz has always been about racing, that's kind of their thing. And with various other manufacturers in the Le Mans or otherwise, that's their thing as well. Pescarolo, for instance, you know them from the Le Mans. Whereas with Cadillac, that's not really the case. Cadillac isn't known first and foremost for racing, but they are also pretty good at it. This just happened to be one of the occasions where they didn't have as much success. Now, a 2nd place finish is still not bad, but at the same time, something like the DPI VR prototype, which is much newer and looks like an LMP1 car, was a dominant force. The Cadillac CTS-V race car in the Pirelli World Challenge was a very successful car. So Cadillac knows what they're doing when it comes to racing, but likewise with the Panoz, there are just certain times where it doesn't go your way. Maybe the other cars were that little bit faster, or just had better drivers, or mishaps, or did not finishes, did not starts, did not qualifies. All of these things, of course, come into play. And it just so happened that, unfortunately for Cadillac, one or all of those things came into play to mean that the car didn't have a 1st place finish. But still, 2nd and 3rd isn't bad. In fact, that's really good, actually, not just not bad. And I love the car in that way that I mentioned earlier, because you don't expect something like this from Cadillac. In a similar way to how you wouldn't expect there to be a Rolls-Royce LMP car, even though if they did do that, they'd probably do it pretty well. And although this car didn't have huge success, I was first really properly introduced to the car and really noticed it for the first time in Forza 4. Funnily enough, around the same time as the Panoz, because although it was around earlier than that, I didn't really pay much attention to it. I've always loved prototypes, but especially because I went from the Gran Turismo franchise over to the Forza franchise, I, as you would expect, went with what I knew. So I tended to go for the cars that were the more obvious choices, stuff like your 787B, your Toyota GT1, the BMW V12 LMR, those safe choices, sometimes even race-winning choices. The BMW and the Mazda, for instance, did win at the Le Mans. But then when I started to, especially in my mid-teens and late teens, right up until now, I started to develop more of a love for the less obvious choices. Even if they're not quite as good, or in the case of this or the Panoz, not quite as successful, I still love them because they dare to be different And of course they didn't actually win, but that's almost not the point for me. I love them because of the fact that they dared to be different, even if it wasn't as successful. They didn't just try to do what all of the other teams were doing, especially in the case of Panos. They were radically different. This Cadillac isn't radically different necessarily to the case or to the extent as the Panos, but it's different for sure. It looks different, it has different proportions. It's a little bit more close to something like the BMW V12 LMR, that very simplified, low, wide, squat down body style with a really low cut wing and a relatively simple design overall, devoid of huge intakes and crazy wings and winglets. It's just a pure focus machine, and to me, the number one thing that actually drew my attention to the Cadillac was just the appearance. I love the look of this car, and of course I can't say how it handles in real life because I've never driven one, obviously, but in the game it's a great car to work with, and it was still not a choice which a lot of people went for. But like with the Panos and various other cars in this entire list, in fact, it is the kind of car that those of us who do love it tend to really, really love it, and will often choose it over choices like the Audi R8 or the Bentley Speed 8, which might be a better option, but we'll still choose these because we like them even more. And for me, that really is the pure reason why this Cadillac is my favourite modern LMP. Now, I say modern because it's not my favourite prototype of all time. That is higher on this list. But specifically for, say, the LMP 900 era and onward, where they become much more focused prototypes again after the GT1 era, this is my favourite one, the LMP-02 in particular. But if you are new to this series, of course, you can check out all the other cars in my top 50 favourites by clicking through at the end of this video. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.